I'll begin by offering a little bit of an overview of what took place with the two-day hearing. Of course, I've had a record, or I've spent a lot of time over the last 5 years covering these proceedings when they happened. The pandemic offered an opportunity to cover them remotely, and then, as Marjorie and myself found out, there was not going to be media access for anybody who was outside of England or Wales. And what we saw with these proceedings, before I get to the core of the issues that we want to deal with today, was shameful. And I must state that I fared better when it came to the court martial against Chelsea Manning and trying to get access to cover those proceedings. The way that they managed the press showed that they really have contempt for open justice when it comes to allowing journalists to be present. There were complaints from people who were there, and there were also complaints from the union in which Julian Assange is a member in Australia, the Media, Entertainment, Arts and Alliance, that had asked the court to specifically make sure that people in Australia, which, they want to be able to cover this because Julian Assange is an Australian citizen, but they were denied. This day one was a long overdue opportunity to force the UK High Court of Justice to grapple with the issues of freedom of the press that have long been the focus of opposition to these charges. And that includes what we've seen from the most reputable groups when it comes to civil liberties or human rights or freedom of the press. The defense stood before two of the judges and they presented their grounds for appeal. And specifically, I felt like they emphasized the state-sponsored or state-backed criminality that had been exposed as a result of WikiLeaks. And I'm going to leave that for Marjorie because she's got a very good presentation. But to me, that was what day one was about. It was orienting the judges and focusing their attention on the WikiLeaks disclosures once again. On day two, the lawyers representing the US government merely rehashed arguments that we had already heard from the government. They also viciously sharpened the narrative of the case by emphasizing the aspect of the indictment that alleges that Assange encouraged Chelsea Manning to, quote, steal, unquote, the documents. They stressed this false idea that Assange, quote, sought to recruit and worked with hackers to conduct malicious computer attacks for the purposes of benefiting WikiLeaks, end quote. And remarkably, prosecutor Claire Dobbin dismissed every single detail in a Yahoo News report on alleged plans by the CIA to kidnap, poison, or kill Assange. The government submission to the court stated, and I'm not making this up, I wish I was, that the Yahoo article is not fresh evidence of fact, but simply yet another recitation of opinion by journalists on the matters already before the district judge. But to be clear, this article that we're discussing or mentioning here had over 30 sources from the Trump administration. They were current and former officials. They were also people who had held positions in US intelligence agencies and were in a position to know whether CIA Director Mike Pompeo and other officials had sketched out plans to target WikiLeaks and to go so far as to plot against Julian Assange in ways that we know the CIA has plotted against leaders or individuals that they wanted to eliminate previously or assassinate. And so it's not far-fetched that this would be reported. And the journalists, to their credit, Michael Isikoff, Zach Dorfman, Sean Naylor, are seasoned national security journalists. These were not people who were sharing their opinions about what they think happened. And just to clarify, because I saw CNN misreport these claims, these did not come from Julian Assange's legal team. In other words, they didn't just come up with this in some back room while they were working on the case. This came specifically from journalists who reported news about what the government allegedly did to target Julian Assange. So I'll now spend some time outlining several key misrepresentations of facts, as well as the way they are misrepresenting the charges. And this surfaced in response to Assange's request for an appeal. Some of these are recycled falsehoods, and the government insists, we're going to insist today that the government is mischaracterizing the indictment and the allegations. The government insists that it is Assange who is mischaracterizing the prosecution because he is not charged for what they say is mere publication. They maintain that he's being prosecuted for aiding and abetting or conspiring with Chelsea Manning. Now, the problem here is that this depends on a conspiracy theory that has been concocted by the US government. And I believe to some degree that if you go back to CIA Director Mike Pompeo, it to some extent originates with him. But just to engage with this theory that they've put forward, essentially, the idea is that WikiLeaks was this operation that was recruiting people in intelligence agencies or the US military to steal documents. Chelsea Manning answered the call, and when she answered the call, they connected allegedly over an encrypted chat client, and they exchanged messages. And in these conversations, Julian Assange was requesting that she go and steal more documents, more and more documents, was directing her. They have messages that they claim say, okay, go steal Guantanamo detainee assessment files. And then they believe that that's what leads Chelsea Manning to go grab those files, for example. But in this theory, what they're doing is they're taking the agency away from Chelsea Manning that she had when she chose to become a whistleblower and release these files to WikiLeaks. In her statement during the court-martial that I covered extensively, what she stated was, the decisions that I made to send documents and information to the WikiLeaks organization and the website were my own decisions. And it's important to recognize that she did not immediately choose to submit the files to WikiLeaks. Before she was considering the New York Times, she was considering WikiLeaks. To me, if she was some kind of recruit that WikiLeaks had picked up, she would not have considered giving the material to legacy or prestige media organizations that have long been well known to journalism. And so she took a chance because she was going to have to leave the States and return to Baghdad. She took the chance of submitting those documents to WikiLeaks and seeing how they were handled. Now, you'll hear during the argument every so often mention of this most wanted leaks list. And most people would have absolutely no clue to what they are referring, but it's something in which the US government has ascribed importance to bolster this conspiracy theory that they've made up about Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning to further their case. So to improve the knowledge of the general public, I'll read an excerpt from my book that I wrote that basically lays out what this most wanted leaks list was, and then includes a quote from Chelsea Manning's attorney about how ridiculous it is that the attorneys for the government would put this in front of the High Court of Justice. On May 14th, 2009, WikiLeaks requested nominations from human rights groups, lawyers, historians, journalists, and activists for documents, as well as databases from around the world that the media organization would work to expose. The list, according to prosecutors, was organized by country and stated that documents or materials nominated to the list must be likely to have political, diplomatic, ethical, or historical impact on release. WikiLeaks suggested the information should be plausibly obtainable to a well-motivated insider or outsider. With little to no evidence, military prosecutors called the list Manning's guiding light, a characterization that Manning's defense attorney, David Coombs, directly challenged during his closing argument. And Coombs said, quote, "It was WikiLeaks saying, look, tell us, humanitarians, activists, NGOs, fellow reporters, what do you want to know in your country? What in your country is being hidden from the public that you believe the public should know? Give us a list. We are going to compile that list, and we are going to work to obtain that list. What does this sound like? Any journalistic organization that has like a hotline or anything else says, call us. You got a story? Call us. We'll investigate." Now, on the list, Coombs pointed out there were 78 items, and military prosecutors were only able to remotely tie Manning to 4 of the things on the list. She could have sent any of these specific items that were there. She had access to an intelligence network of top secret, secret, and unclassified information, but she didn't. So the idea that she was using this as her guiding light does not add up. And now, as I begin to wind down my remarks here about the misrepresentation of facts, let's get into the characterization of the WikiLeaks website. The government has frequently made references that explicitly signal that they believe WikiLeaks is, as an organization, is a criminal enterprise. And I would like to just go back to, if you pull up archived versions of WikiLeaks, this is what it said on the website when Chelsea Manning would have had the ability to decide, do I or don't I want to submit the material to WikiLeaks? It says WikiLeaks is an uncensorable version of leaks for it's for untraceable mass document leaking and analysis. Principled leaking has changed the course of history for the better. It can alter the course of history in the present. It can lead us to a better future, was another thing. And they mentioned Daniel Ellsberg. They made the Pentagon Papers, their release and the publication, a central part of their mission and what they were trying to do. The power of principled leaking to embarrass government, corporations, and institutions is amply demonstrated through recent history. The public scrutiny of otherwise unaccountable and secretive institutions forces them to consider the ethical implications of their actions. And then WikiLeaks will be the forum for the ethical defection and exposure of unaccountable and abusive power to the people. So this lie that has been said about them seeking to solicit the information for the purposes of, saying we want illegally obtained material. That's not what they were doing and not what they did, and clearly had a nexus with whistleblowing that the government can't acknowledge. Otherwise, they would have to junk their entire case. So, and I'll just run down quickly a few things that the prosecutor, Claire Dobbins, said on day 2 before handing this over to our next speaker. It was mentioned that there was this scheme of stealing classified documents. Again, like I said, they do not solicit illegally obtained material, or are they in the business of partnering with people to engage in the illegal actions themselves? Nobody has ever been able to produce evidence that that's anything that WikiLeaks was doing behind the scenes. If Manning had been able to crack a hash, then Manning would have been able to log on to computers that did not belong to her. I thought that this was a remarkable thing to say because none of those computers belonged to Manning. They were all U.S. military computers. But the fact of the matter is that she had a security clearance, and they always, I think, make this mistake of acting like Chelsea Manning exceeded her authorized access when, in fact, she was able to access any of these information databases and download and take the information out of her secure facility. That was one of the things that was identified as a security issue in the military. They changed it after WikiLeaks, but she had that access. And in fact, there was a Supreme Court decision recently that suggested that if this was relitigated before the U.S. military, prosecutors might have had trouble actually bringing this computer fraud and abuse charge against Chelsea Manning because she did have access to those materials. And then Dobbins says, and this is a good way to close, An independent grand jury found probable cause to indict Julian. Well, some of you out there might have heard before that old adage that a grand jury could indict a ham sandwich. It means absolutely nothing to repeat that Julian Assange was indicted by a U.S. grand jury. Prosecutors are very good at manipulating grand juries to return criminal charges. So there are other things from those couple days that could be brought up, and I'll maybe raise them later on in the webinar, but I'd like to turn it over to our other speakers now. Thank you.